Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Work Crowd series on rebooting your marketing strategy post-COVID. I'm delighted to be joined today by our expert panel, Nick and Oksana, who are going to talk about international expansion, moving into new markets and territories. I'm also joined by Alice Weightman, who's a co-founder of the Work Crowd, and I'm sure many of you have spoken to Alice in the past. So thank you very much indeed for joining this afternoon. I'm based up in the northeast at the moment, and it's rather wild, blustery day. So I hope it's a little bit better weather where everyone else is based. But it's fantastic to be doing this presentation today and this webinar. It's going to be presentation format. So Nick and Oksana have both got some presentations to discuss with us about how to move into new territories, new markets, and expand your market territory. And, you know, we decided to run this series really to help and support businesses post-COVID. We're getting through August, September is around the corner, and I know a number of businesses are really wanting to rethink their strategy before the end of the year. And we've had a number of the Work Crowd freelance experts talk to us about how to re-engage with their clients, rethink their strategies, and end the year on a more positive note than, I guess, how it ended up in March. My name is Alice Weightman. I'm the founder or co-founder of the Work Crowd and also of Hanson Search. The Work Crowd is an online platform. It connects businesses directly to expert freelance marketeers all over the world. So we've been helping businesses now for a number of years, helping them to think about their marketing strategy or find brilliant content writers or PR experts. Hanson Search is a traditional headhunting business that also works globally. So we have an office in London, Paris, and Dubai, and we help businesses find expert marketeers and communication professionals. So just as a way of introduction about Nick, Nick has over 20 years experience in the corporate communications and PR sector. He's a Brit based in Germany and has worked all over the world, from UK, Europe, and the North America and beyond. And he's also a writer and journalist, so he's covered all different aspects of communications. And he's going to share his insights into international expansion. So I'll hand over to you, first of all, Nick.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks everybody at the Work Crowd as well as for Alice and Madeline. I'm going to just share some insights this afternoon from the viewpoint of a freelancer who may be looking at setting up or expanding or just looking at working with a client in a particular market. So very, very much it's a mindset whereby we're not just going to say, well, this strategy would work in a market. The idea is that you can take bits and pieces from this and apply it to anywhere else in the world. A little bit more on my background. I have worked in the tech and automotive space, for about 20 years. And I'm now based in Germany, in the beautiful city of Cologne. If you get a map of Europe out, I'm about 2 hours south of Brussels. I'm about 4 hours east of Paris. And I'm about 35 minutes from one of the best wine regions in the world, Mosel, in the southwest of Germany. I can do tours and I can highly recommend some fairly good bottles of wine. For those who are aware of the automotive world, there's a place called Greenhell, the Nürburgring, and that's about 30 minutes from where I am. So it gives you an idea of locations. Just general disclaimer, don't sell all your worldly goods, pets and take off in a camper van based on this presentation. And this is not a, we're going to make all your dreams come true. It's not, but it might help you make some informed decisions. So let's start off. You've got a great idea. There's a client or there's someone who's thinking, let's expand, let's go to that great place in Spain, move overseas, I'll do a few hours in the morning, and in the afternoon, I'll be like this guy laying on the beach. For those of you old enough to remember, this is the lovely Ray Winston, Sexy Beast. He goes to Spain, he dreams of a life, and it all falls through. the two questions here are, how do you know it's the right thing? How do you want, how do you look at exploring a new or more profitable market? Location, location, location is absolutely key. When you look at somewhere, I'll give you an example, Germany, but it could be Austria, it could be Switzerland, it could be Spain. Spain is also a good example to use. Look at planes, trains and automobiles. Think of your clients getting to you, you getting to your clients. The transport links are vital, whether that's to transfer a city hopper or a region. Then think of the journalist that's got to get to that area as well. While roads always look good, get a map and take, you've got to do the city versus suburbs. Where I live in Cologne, I'm about 10, 15 minutes from Bonn, which used to be the West German capital, and we've got a great airport here. But when it was the capital, it served most places in the world. It doesn't anymore. So you've got to think, well, where do I go? Well, for starters, I'd have to go about an hour and a half south to Frankfurt, or I have to go north to Düsseldorf just to get a plane to somewhere sensible like Spain, let's think, Romania, Italy. It's just not particularly well served internationally, but it does most of Germany. So there's things that you've got to really kind of consider. The other side of it, speaking the language and also looking at the culture. Example here, between April and May, there are lots of public holidays that people don't really take into account. In Germany, you'd think that that is one country as a whole and they're all on the same day. They're not. Because the country is either Catholic or Lutheran, some are celebrated, some are not. So you can do a press trip to Frankfurt on one day and it will be empty. Whereas you go to Cologne and they'll be having a festival or something else going on there. So it's the differences even within a of one single country can be really, really different. Number crunching. Germany, Switzerland and Austria have a completely different tax and accounting system to the rest of Europe. And it's like nothing else on earth. It's really difficult to kind of get your head around. So if you're doing billing, it will be done in different ways. Also, if you're doing due diligence on a client, Germany and Switzerland, and to some extent Austria, have some of the strictest privacy laws in the world. And doing due diligence on a client sometimes will require a meeting with a judge. So when you're meeting that client, they say, hey, I want to do da-da-da-da. Some traditional forms of due diligence with that client may not be possible. So it's understanding the landscape and understanding what's ahead of you. You've got to also assess competitors. You've got to look up the market itself. Sometimes a guesstimate, pretty good. You've been there, you know folks, you might know one or two journalists. You've got some ideas, you've been there before with other clients. It kind of works, but don't just assume and commit everything to it automatically, because there are other areas or other businesses that might be there ahead of you and may possibly have a competitor that's struggling in that particular market. So jumping in with both feet may not be to your advantage. Also, some other cultural elements, going beyond the bubble. A lot of people will come up with a strategy, some do it, and sit in London, and they'll think, okay, well, this is going to work great. What works great in the centre of Trafalgar Square may not work in the centre of Budapest, Hungary, or Milan. And an activation that works perfectly in London may not work in a particular region where you are. So it sounds like common sense, and most people would take that into account, but sometimes it won't. Also, different clients have different expectations. KPIs are different in different sectors. A very simple thing like a media audit, I'm looking at one at the moment. What seems to be a very easy way of gauging what the market is doing can actually be an issue, because obviously different languages, different regions have got different ways of doing things. I tend to look at market leaders, if I can. I try and look at their most recent marketing event or activation. I try and get a good idea of what their coverage is and the position, and even tone of voice can sometimes sway you. Just a simple thing like a Facebook post may give you some insights as to whether your idea is going to work there or whether your client is going to get accepted in that territory. Also, looking at sponsorships and partnerships. The biggest energy drinks company in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria is Red Bull. For very obvious reasons, they're a German company. When you look at the also-rans, their market share is so small. There are a couple that are actually not doing anything in the region at all and just have an office. So you're looking at a dominant player. That market may almost be a monopoly, so it may not be worth investigating. So look very carefully at that. Dipping your toe in the water, a couple of times I've worked with clients in Switzerland, and soft message launching and testing a PR program or activation and see if it works. The other thing to consider is translations, and translate very, very carefully. Some of the guys in the car world will know there is a vehicle called the Opel or Vauxhall Nova in England. It did very, very well for a very long time. In the rest of Europe, it was known as the Corsa. The reason being is that if you translate Nova into Spanish, it means won't go or won't run. So you wonder why it's not selling and people are buying the Fiesta or the Golf. It comes down to the translation. Do a local site visit. Yes, you might be able to find a way of claiming the taxes back and doing it in a creative way. I've done it a couple of times, going into a city, buying the local papers, talking with a friendly local media. There are sometimes some journalists. I've done it a couple of times in Paris. Buying somebody a cup of coffee can give you weeks or months of insights, and it's really, really worth it. And also, work crowd. Talk to people like Alice and Madeleine. They know there will be a freelancer in that area or potentially or region or whatever. They can connect to use your network and come up with it. And also there are organisations such as the PRCA, CIPR, and they also have people on board. And the bottom line is, if it doesn't feel comfortable to you there and then, probably not a good idea to go jumping into the swimming pool to see if you can swim. On the subject of PR associations, I did a bit of digging. Pretty much there's a PRCA or a Public Relations Association somewhere in the world. And there's a link here. If you click on it or copy it, you'll find them. And I've put them here. There's Europe, there's UK. I think there's one there which is Hungarian. There's a PR Institute of Australia, really good if you're looking to move to Australia or work in Australia or have a client there. Giving them a call or having a chat with them and building up a rapport might be useful. And then going to the left-hand side of the screen, there's sort of the South American, Brazil, and then America and Canada associations. I found that really, if the last line is you're really, really stuck, giving some of these guys a call, having a chat, and seeing what's possible, and they'll be able to connect you. The final one, don't expect the audience, even the PR country manager that you're working with, to react in the usual way. You can have, I think the saying is, I think General Patton once said, a plan is only a plan until the first shot is fired. You can go to Spain and you've got a plan that was created for France, Spain, Italy, wherever in mind. The second it goes, bang, doesn't work, even as a team. And be prepared to adapt, change, look at it, look at the analytics. Is there a local competitor? Has somebody done something similar before? Measure it, look at the analytics, look at the data. And also, it doesn't help to give a follow-up call to local media, see what's happened, why they didn't cover the story. And I know it sounds bad and journalists never like that, but if you explain the situation, where you're coming from, they're usually pretty good. So that's just a very, very short set of insights from me and from using some of my experience. And that's been across sort of North America, the DACH regions, that's Germany, Austria, Switzerland. Others work with Italy and Eastern Europe as well. But Oksana, I think, has got some additional insights and will be able to add more. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Great. Thank you so much indeed, Nick. That was really insightful and gave us a really nice overview for whatever market people are thinking about moving into. following those principles. And I do love a plan is only a plan until the first shot is fired. So I wrote that one down and I'll be quoting that. Oksana, I'm going to pass over to you, but just by a short way of introduction, Oksana has got extensive experience again in communications, over 15 years experience, has worked with 35 different brands across 26 different industry sectors and 6 different countries. She is a Russian lady based in Italy and is going to share some fantastic insights. She's also got a PhD in linguistics, has written a book, so as an author, and I know is going to share some insights about opening up into markets and a deep dive more into the Russian market as well. So if anyone's got any questions for Nick and Oksana, you can start firing them through. There's sort of functionality at the bottom of the screen, which is for Q&A on chat, and Madeline's going to be picking them up and asking at the end of Oksana's presentation. So Oksana, over to you, and thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you, Alice. Thanks for the introduction. I'm really excited to be wrapping up this fantastic series. And thank you, Nick, for sharing your insights. That was very useful and insightful. And yeah, happy to take the floor from there. Let me just share my screen with you, because I'll also be showing the presentation that I have prepared. Okay. Here we go. You see that, right?
Yep.
Okay, so international expansion. My talk will be mostly focused on the Russian market and actually I'll use that as a framework to show you how you can analyze any country when you are considering venturing a new market. So first, a few words about myself. Alice has actually introduced me already, and thanks for that. I have 15 years of experience in PR and corporate communications, and I worked with 35 brands from startups to the biggest corporations. So this across 26 industries and 6 countries. This means I think I do know how to build up the communication strategies for companies of different sizes across different markets. And as Alice has said, I have just commissioned my first book, which will hopefully soon be on shelves. And cross-cultural communication is also there as a dedicated chapter. So I'm happy to be here and to share my insights with you. As I only have 10-15 minutes, I'll only touch base these key important aspects that I think are important for everyone who is considering again venturing the new market. So we will just quickly see some tools and tips that are important here, and then I'll give you a quick market overview of the Russian market. We will have a look at how communicate to Russians if you want to make it work out, and I'll show you the culture map that I use a lot in my daily work. We will also have a look at where and how find potential partners in Russia, and I'll also give you a very brief overview of the Russian media landscape. So you know better than me that we live in a global connected world. Now, today, it takes us only 40 hours to go for around the world trip. If you compare to the 16th century, it took people 3 years. So you can understand the speed of changes and how quick and fast the today world is. 65% of Fortune 500 companies actually have international locations. And as of July 2020, 4.6 billion people across the world has internet connections. So internet penetration is quite high. And the point is that internet allows us to stay connected even nowadays when the international borders are closed. And it also shows us our neighbor's grass, not only our neighbor's grass, but also the grass on the other side of the planet. So that's why no wonder so many people want to travel and so many companies start thinking about international expansion. However, venturing into a new market can often be risky. Even if you consider all the factors and do everything right, you still cannot be sure that everything will go, again, as Nick said, that everything will go according to the plan. You never know. However, there are 7 criteria that everyone would find useful to analyze before venturing into a new market. Nick has partially covered all of those criteria, so I'll just give you a quick overview again. So first, you might want to start with key factor or anti-factor. This is one thing that actually impacts your business or your industry most of all. Like, for example, for banking industry, it could be the time for getting a license. For manufacturing, it could be the cost of manual work. Then, I don't know, for retail, for example, it could be distributors network, etc., etc. So every business knows for sure what its key factor is, and so have a look how the situation is structured on the market you're interested in. Then have a look, of course, at the market conditions, how big and developed the market is, whether it's falling or growing, how many competitors are there, and what you can do to beat the competitors, and what you will get in case of success. Then have a look at budget and estimate potential entry costs, including those for relocation, registration, taxes, wages. You can also have a look at the grants that are available in the market, and have a look at the investment climate in general. Fourth, get the understanding of the local culture. Nick already said how important it is, and actually, yeah, the entry barriers sometimes can be quite high, so you need to understand that before you go. Assess how quickly you can enter into the new market. This again depends on how much time is required for different business procedures like registration, relocation, licensing, etc. Then understand where and how you can find the local partners, clients, and leads, and what to start with when you build your local network. And finally, make sure you and your team have all the necessary expertise and all the necessary skills that will allow you to be competitive on the new market. I won't dare to give you any advice now on the top row, because actually it depends on the business and you need to know the particular business and you need to know the team. But I can share with you some insights on market conditions, culture, and partners network. And I'll show you how it works if we look at the Russian market. So let's start with a closer look. This is Russia. You most probably know that this is a big, quite developed oil and gas country, which is under Putin's governance since the year 2000. Let me share with you some more figures. Indeed, it is the biggest country in the world. Just imagine, if you take the UK and multiply that by 71, that will be Russian territory. However, the population density here is quite low, and almost 70% of the population live in the European part, which is the one to the left from the red line. Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to Russia, that the country is also very diverse. We have 190 nationalities and ethnic groups, and lots of local dialects here. So this is why that's not an easy task at all to develop a universal message when it comes to Russia. Again, another important thing is that almost all nationalities living in Russia speak Russian, but not so many people speak English. I've had a look at the statistics, and it says that only 5% of the Russian population speaks fluent English. So then you do localization of your product, of your messaging, make sure it's in perfect Russian, because otherwise it will be quite challenging. And finally, we have 9 time zones, and the flight from Moscow to Vladivostok, for example, can take you up to 9 hours. This is also an important thing to mention when you to keep in mind when you plan a business trip or a meeting. Let's see at some more numbers. I guess I can share the presentation with you afterwards, so you can have a closer look at the figures, but I did some homework and put together some key economic indicators for Russia as compared to US, UK, some European countries, and China. And you can see in light green, highlighted with green, you can see the lines where we are quite competitive. Like you can see that in terms of ease of doing business, we are ahead of France and Italy. In terms of cost of living, we have the lowest cost of living here, which is also a good thing. In terms of employment rate, we are even ahead of the US. But then if you look at the other lines, you will see that there is still some room for improvement. Like, for example, on global competitive index on household net disposable income for life expectancy, we are unfortunately the last on this table. We have 0 brands on the latest Brand Z top most valuable global brands report, and also we are ranked pretty low on the corruption ranking by Transparency International. And in fact, Russia is a country of contrasts. What you see on the left is the country that you most probably see on the news. We have significant weight on the global political, business, and military landscape. High internet penetration, and Russian IT specialists are widely recognized, and everyone is looking for them. We also have one of the strongest banking system, and 65% of all payments in the country are now cashless. However, there is also another Russia that you can see on the right, and it's rarely covered by international media outlets. In this country, there is huge social inequality. Just some figures again. 10% of the most wealthiest Russians account for 83% of the total personal wealth, which means the other 90% account only for 17%. And this difference in life quality and in salaries and wages is much more noticeable when you move from Moscow and big cities where consumer demand is concentrated. If you move to smaller cities, like maybe only 300 kilometers away from Moscow, the situation is completely different. And almost 30% of population live below the poverty line, and this figure comes to 51% when it comes to families with 3 and more kids. I know this doesn't sound very optimistic. However, if you run a social impact business and your product or your offer can make people jump in from the right side to the left side, then I guess that your chances for success could be pretty high. Now, as I'm a communication expert, let me dive deeper into my favorite area, communicating to Russians. So the question is that difficult to communicate to us? And the short answer is yes. And that's not only about the alphabet, which is totally different. This picture is quite a famous meme. From left to right, an American, a Russian, and an Italian. Well, indeed, we do not smile that often to strangers. And our words of wisdom teach us that emotions should be moderated. Like my grandmother used to say that laughing without reason is a sign of stupidity. So of course, we do not want to look stupid, and this is kind of incorporated and imprinted in us. However, we can express our emotions when our direct interests are concerned, whether it comes to big sport or to big stakes in business. And there are also scientific proofs for that. Here you can see the best-selling book of Erin Meyer, an INSEAD professor who actually compared lots of countries, and she did thousands of interviews with top managers across the world. And you can see on the scale that when it comes to business negotiations, Russian people are quite expressive and confrontational, as opposed, for example, to the UK, which is more emotionally unexpressive and much less confrontational. Now, let me show you the culture map in more details. So basically, the concept of culture map that Erin Meyer has developed allows you to see the cultural norm when it comes to 8 main criteria, like communicating, evaluating other people, leading the others, taking decisions, building trust, showing your disagreement, scheduling tasks and appointments, and persuading others. I have called the Russia culture map the world of extremes because you can see that almost all the dots here are quite close to the extreme endpoints. And let me show you in more details what each of the criteria means and how basically you can apply this to practice. So in terms of communication, our communication is high context. This means context is really important. And what words mean, actually the word meaning can vary, like words can mean totally opposite things depending on the context. Also, messages are not only spoken, but also read between the lines. And this is important to know. Therefore, when you talk to Russian, you'd better start with listening carefully, clarifying, asking open questions, and making sure you understand correctly. If what's being said contradicts your feelings, then you'd better trust your sixth sense rather than words. Second criteria, evaluating. You can see that here we are on the left, and we tend to provide negative feedback frankly and directly without trying to soften that. We love using absolute descriptions like always, never, ever, even if it's not the case. And you should never expect a Russian assess your work as amazing or wonderful or excellent, because in Russia actually okay means good, and good means okay means excellent, and good means super excellent. So keep this in mind when talking to a Russian. Third, as for the leading style, here again, status is very important, and distance between a boss and a subordinate is quite high. What's important here? For example, before you speak at some negotiations, you should identify who is the boss in the room and ask her her permission to speak if you want to avoid awkward situation. In terms of deciding, decisions are normally made by individuals and not by groups. And this means you need less time for approval, but be ready for a step back at any stage. Again, if you are expected to make a decision, do that quick and be firm. Otherwise, Russians can just doubt your professionalism. In terms of building trust, you can see that this is relationship based. This means just doing business together is not enough for a Russian person to start trusting you. You should consider evening drinks, family visits, and some informal activities together. Russians start trusting you only when they understand who you are and they know others well who trust you. In terms of disagreeing, again, as I've already said, we are quite confrontational, but still we do not think that expressing your negative feedback can impact the negotiations. Actually, if your Russian counterpart says at the beginning, I totally disagree, this doesn't mean at all the end of the conversation. Quite the opposite, it means the beginning of a highly enjoyable debate. In terms of scheduling, we are quite flexible, and we are great masters of multitasking, which sometimes, unfortunately, can impact negatively the deadlines, because we often change tasks, interrupt, and start doing many things altogether. And finally, when trying to persuade a Russian, start with the theory before presenting a fact or an opinion. And add some quotes, research, statistics, because this will always put more weight to what you are saying. Another good thing about Erin Meyer's tool is that you actually can compare 66 countries across these 8 dimensions. So if you are interested in another market, not Russia, just go there and check. And actually I did that. I did the comparison to the UK, which you can see in yellow, and the US that you can see in red. And actually you can see, you can now understand why I call the Russia world map a world of extremes, because you can see that the UK yellow line is quite like, it's from 40 to 60% medium range. And if you look, for example, at the US line, it's also quite extreme. But the interesting thing is that the meanings are quite opposite to the ones in Russia. Like, for example, if you have a look at the last dimension, persuading, in Russia it's principle first, in US that's application first. So you need to build your whole argumentation system quite the opposite way. This is also interesting to know. One last thing on the culture map before I move further. That's a perfect framework, but that's not a universal key to every person. Because, for example, a startup founder from Russia who went for an acceleration program in the Silicon Valley can behave more like an American, while this culture map can 100% be applicable to a Lukoil or Gazprom top manager. So don't use that as an instruction, and but rather than it's rather a framework than again a universal advice. So now when we know how to communicate to Russians, let's have a quick look at where and how you can find potential partners, both business-wise and communication-wise. You remember that trust in Russia is very important, and people start trusting you, then they know others who trust you. So that's why network is so important. Business-wise, you can start first with your embassies and consulates or chambers of commerce, because they are quite supportive here in Russia and they can give you lots of support. Then also do not underestimate social media communities. They're also very active and supportive in Russia, and you can get lots of insight there. Consider also conferences, trade events, and network events. But again, there you will need someone who will actually become your bridge and who will bring you there, because you will need that first introduction. Communications wise, you have a vast variety of options here. You can look for support from a global agency, a local agency, or freelance advisor. Here highlighted in bold, here you can see the global agencies from top PR agencies list. So highlighted in bold, those agencies that have representative offices here in Russia, and you can see that there are like more than 50% of them. Again, when it comes to choose the option that is right for you, that's not only a budget question, which is obvious, but this is also the question of the scope of work that you want to commission. I've been working both on the agency side in-house and as an independent advisor, and from my experience, best freelancers are like Shiva. So they can handle so many multiple tasks at once that no agency would ever commit to. And I'll give you a specific example. This is the pie chart based on my timesheet for one of my biggest clients here. And you can see that actually media relations is only 1/3 of the pie. And I'm also deeply involved into project management, strategy development, social media, investor relations, marketing materials, etc., etc. And I do believe that such synergy with the rest of the team also have some added value to what I do in terms of PR. The only pity is that I don't have 48 hours a day, but that's another story. I guess I'm almost run out of time, so I'll just quickly give you an overview of the Russian media landscape, and I will be based here on the famous PESO communication models that divides all the channels into paid, earned, shared, and owned. And actually no one is worse or better than the other. You just need to use all of them in order to get their synergy and to get the best results. So paid media. Again, here in Russia, you can actually, when it comes to a project launch or to a one-time project, sometimes it makes more sense to go for a native story for an advertorial rather than hiring a PR person. Again, you have the results are immediate and the budgets are quite affordable. So you can see here that it starts from actually $500 per month for trade or business media, and it can be like 3,000 or something for when it comes to top tier general interest media for a campaign. And here on the left side, you can see my favorite top 5 media outlets that do just brilliant native projects. And here on the screen, you can see the screenshot from a native project of Medusa for MTS, which is a leading Russian telecom provider. And I use this screen to show you that paid media are used not only by small companies that have no chance to make people talking about them otherwise, but also by the big guys, because they really use those channels to create some fascinating stories, to drive more attention to their key messages, and to make their communication more efficient. In terms of earned media, here you can see top 3 outlets where literally everyone wants to be in when it comes to general interest media. That's Kommersant, Vedomosti, and RBK. And literally every company in Russia and abroad, when it comes to the Russian market, wants to be in, which makes it pretty difficult unless you become a unicorn or buy SpaceX or do something similar. However, trade and regional media are also very strong in Russia, and sometimes they can bring you even more return on investments with significantly shorter turnaround time and lower budgets. Here is another example, Telecom Daily, which is one of top media when it comes to IT and telecom. Also, we have English language media here in Russia, like the Moscow Times and Russia Beyond the Headlines. These are the most popular one. One quick tip when it comes to earned media. If you want to raise your brand awareness and to build trust, you might want to have a look at Pressfeed.ru, which is a Russian analog of the ResponceSource that you have in UK. Basically, it's a marketplace where all journalists can post their requests and everyone can comment on that. And currently there are like 10,000 media outlets registered there that post something like 450 requests per day, and the average conversion rate is about 58%. And moreover, for as little as $700 per month, these guys can even guarantee you 5 pieces of coverage monthly. Social media. Here, top 5 social media ranked in Russia, ranked by average daily reach. You can see that as everywhere in the world, video rules, and YouTube is number 1 with almost 75% of penetration. Then when we speak about social media in Russia, it's important to mention that there are 2 very strong local players, which are Vkontakte and Odnoklassniki, number 2 and number 4 on the list accordingly. Instagram is number 3, and Facebook wraps up the list being number 5. What is important to mention here in terms of Facebook, we do use that in Russia not only for personal things, but also for work. And that's not a rare thing to see a deal closing that started from a comment on newsfeed, on Facebook newsfeed, or from a message in Messenger. Another reason for that is that we actually have LinkedIn blocked in Russia since 2016. So basically many Russians use Facebook as you use LinkedIn in Europe and maybe in the US. Another important local player here is Telegram. It's not in top 5 yet, but it's growing fast. And it has it was launched by the same guy who did Vkontakte. It now has 400 million users. And if you aim at active urban millennials, that might be the right platform for you to be. And finally, 2 trends when it comes to owned media. First, different USG platforms are very popular in Russia, and sometimes their audience exceeds the one from top tier federal media. Yandex.Zen that you can see on the screen is one example. VC.ru is another example. And one more trend is that corporate media are now actually becoming the new media. Here you can see an example of Tinkoff Journal, which started as a corporate blog for Tinkoff Bank by Oleg Tinkoff, but now it become one of major media in consumer finance, with almost 100 people working on that. So let me just summarize key takeaways for you. And so now we are kind of on a red line with the borders closed and everything, but please consider these final 5 steps so that you are ready, then the lights turn green again and the international borders are open and you are ready to start. So 5 steps to consider when thinking about international expansion. Conduct a proper market research. Nick has also talked about that. Localize your offer. Again, Nick has told us about the translation. However, remember that localization is not only about translation. It's also about adjusting your whole product, your messaging, and the whole strategy. So make sure it's relevant to the local mentality and it really means something to the local audience, because it's not always the case, unfortunately. In terms of culture, make sure you have built a proper bridge to the local culture and make sure you understand the unspoken. Build your local network that will support you on the way. And finally, keep testing your ideas and adjust your messaging and your whole strategy accordingly. So that's all from me now. Good luck with that. And I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much indeed. And that was incredible, really insightful into the Russian market, but also steps that businesses should be taking if thinking about expanding internationally. So we're going to open up some questions. I can see some questions being flying in, which is fantastic. So do keep those questions coming. Madeline is going to be feeding the questions to our panelists. So if they want to unmute themselves, then we can crack on with those questions.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. That was really, really insightful. I know you both only had a sort of such a small amount of time to actually sort of pack in so much. So I'm actually looking forward to going through both your presentations afterwards in a little bit more detail. So we've got some questions that are coming in. We've had one that's come in from Gianna Luca, which is actually, I think, probably touches a little bit on what you were talking about, Oksana, with regards to culture. So Gianna Lucas, I suppose, asked the questions, so speculated that around why, for example, global communication teams sometimes don't necessarily understand the challenges of local cultures and languages, and is perhaps that part because actually team members are quite often of the same nationality. So there's questions around that very important question in terms of diversity, but also the fact that often they can be based or located in London or the US. So I don't know if Oksana, you perhaps agree with that, if you can perhaps through your experience give us any advice in terms of perhaps how communication teams could perhaps overcome those challenges to actually ensure that as a team they do better understand local cultures, languages, and how to effectively do business?
Yeah, right. I mean, thanks for the question, Gianluca. And yeah, that is really a challenge, and this sometimes can be quite challenging for the teams to understand like the local culture when you are not living in your country for a while. Like, again, that's kind of my case, because I've been living in Italy for the last 6 years, and also as I'm also a linguist by my first education, you know, an interesting fact that in terms of from the language perspective, you are not considered a native speaker anymore after 3 years when you relocated to another location. So for example, now I cannot be technically and scientifically, I cannot be considered anymore a Russian native speaker, because I've been living more than 3 years not in Russia. Again, a solution to that is quite obvious. You need to keep connected to your local, to your native country, to your native community. Again, how I deal with that before the lockdown, I used to come to Russia like maybe every 2 months. So I spent like a week in Russia, and I also keep the connection with my local PR agency, because before moving to Italy, I used to work for PBN Hill Norton Strategies, which is an international agency with a representative office in Russia. And again, I always visit them. I'm always in touch with my colleagues from the agency. We are always discussing the latest trends. I still communicate to my Russian clients. So this kind of allows me to, you know, like to be, how you say that in Russia, like with one step I am in Italy, but with my other step I am still in Russia. So I'm kind of in between those two countries. And again, yeah, the solution here is as obvious as keeping talking to the local guys, maybe also keeping some local clients. Again, for example, like, I don't know, budget wise, it would be better for me to have more European clients and to have more US clients, et cetera, because just in terms of budget and in terms of macroeconomic indicators that I have discussed. But still, I do keep some Russian clients that I still work with, because it allows me to understand what their pains are, what their actual needs are, and that allows me actually to be still competitive on the Russian market as well. I don't know if I have answered the question, and I don't know if Nick wants to add anything here.
No, I completely concur with Oksana and agree with her. I've always tried, when I'm working with a client and I'm dealing in an area where I've physically not got boots on the ground myself, I've always tried to engage with the local office, or if we've got a local partner available to us who can actually speak and be part of the conversation from the sort of the get-go, and with starting a strategy program or something. But yeah, Oksana is absolutely right. You know, trying to keep your contacts close to you and just keeping aware of market conditions.
I think, you know, certainly from a work crowd perspective, when we're working with businesses, either they might be international businesses that are looking to break into the UK, Europe, US, or they're businesses that are, you know, based in the UK, Europe, who are looking to move overseas, is actually finding that local expertise on the ground. And I think that's something that you, Nick, really stressed at the beginning. So that local expertise who really understands understands the culture, as Oksana mentioned in her talk, but also then can actually do that sort of both competitor analysis, but also really sort of deep diving in terms of understanding your customer, who you are communicating to. So I think having that local expertise, you can't replace it. And then interestingly, having individuals really much like yourself, who are in some respects conduits between cultures, who are linguistics but have that multicultural experience, who can bring the sort of who can almost be the sort of interface between perhaps your business, but also the customers in those new territories that you are looking to reach. So hire the right people.
We've had a question about China. I don't know that either of you have got experience in China or can share some advice on how to go about expanding into China. One person has commented, Jennifer said it seems to be very popular in terms of business expansion at the moment. And any tips in terms of breaking into this area? Have either of you had experience in China? No.
Well, I mean, I didn't have that much experience in China neither, but I was like close to that. And there, again, the solution here is that you cannot skip that network part here. Again, it's almost impossible to get into Chinese market unless you don't have that cultural bridge built by and represented by someone you know well, and by someone again who is in your culture, who is actually can be like between the cultures. But again, and Erin Meyer, which is my favorite when it comes to the culture differences, again she's saying that sometimes and this was also mentioned by Gianluca, sometimes like for example you choose a guy to be your provider to the Chinese culture only because he speaks Chinese, but this guy was I don't know, his family moved to UK or US or whatever, so he has never been to China, and the fact he speaks Chinese doesn't mean he like automatically that he understands the Chinese culture. So make sure basically you choose the right provider there, and don't even try to enter this market without a local guy. So that will be my only advice. And also adding again to Gianluca's question, I'll add a link and I'll answer on the comments. I'll put the link there again to the tool that Erin Meyer provides, that you can actually have a look not only at the country profiles, but you can also assess your team profile. And again, if you have that idea, if it seems to you that your local team doesn't understand the specifics of the market where they originally are from, you can test your team. You can ask them some like pretty straightforward questions, and as a result, you can get your team cultural profile, and you can have a look whether your team is actually a Russian team, a UK team, or I don't know, an American team. Nevertheless, their nationality is different. So I'll share that link with you because I think that's pretty useful.
I was going to concur with what Oksana is saying, just refer to, the slide which had the, you've got to decide your outcomes, whether you want a big agency to represent you, a small local agency, or a freelancer. I tend to kind of go with the local fixer. It may not just be a PR issue you've got. You may need somebody to look at it. So I kind of tend to call them fixers because they'll fix any problem you've got. And I think, as Oksana says, you've got to physically have somebody there, not somebody who says they have a presence there. They may not. There is a public relations association for China, and I think there are some web links in one of the slides. I think if you look in there and you go into, there are some PR associations, obviously, but again, I'd also probably give Alice or Madeleine a call and see if that there are any contact. It's using your own network.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've worked a little bit like, actually, we've worked. I think it was a project that actually Oksana helped us with at the time. That particular client was also looking at China. So actually, Oksana had helped one of our clients with a competitor analysis. It was positioning, and was therefore looking at identifying individuals in various different territories who could provide those insights, really then to, I suppose, with those, create a communications plan and a marketing plan to reach those customers. So I think, as Nika said, very much, finding the right people on the ground. There's another question that's come in from Gemma, which is probably one for you, Oksana, which is around e-commerce, whether Russians are open to e-commerce. And actually, this probably leads on to a question that I sort of had, which that you've touched on, which is really around, obviously, different countries do business in different ways. So actually, what advice would you give businesses when they're looking to break into a new territory, in terms of actually finding out how they're best to consume your products, whether it is a service or it's a product you're going to buy. So maybe if you can answer Gemma's question, but sort of think about that a little bit more broadly, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, how open are the Russians to e-commerce? The short answer again is yes. I don't have the statistics with me here, but e-commerce is actually booming over the last years, and Russians do buy things through internet, and AliExpress, for example, is very popular again. Building the bridge from China. Lots of Russians do buy things from AliExpress, from European countries, etc. Again, another question to check here. Remember the story, but there have been sanctions, quite severe sanctions imposed a few years ago. And I know that these sanctions were supposed to be kind of revised, I think, end of July. And I'll be frank with you, I didn't have a look yet at what is the situation now. But for example, I know that, like, for example, a friend of mine who lives in Russia, she couldn't order things from, I think that was KOS, directly to Russia. So she asked me kind of like booking these things for her. And then when she was here, I kind of gave that to her, because again, here you should check all those regulatory issues, because sometimes there could be some obstacles that are not that obvious. So you need to, like, in terms of your business model, you need to estimate those risks. In terms of how ready the Russians are, yeah, I mean, the question is, yes, we do love buying things through internet. And yeah, again, the last few months, then people actually like during the times of lockdown, of course, those figures, I mean, these figures have rocketed worldwide and in Russia as well. So yeah, that's quite that's the sector with quite high potential in Russia. As the second part of the question you were asking, Madeleine, so could you please repeat that, because I'm kind of lost now.
It was more around, I think Gemma highlighted a really valuable point, which is asking, you know, are Russians open to e-commerce, which is that actually culturally different countries will have different ways that they purchase or consume products or services. So what advice would you perhaps give to our audience in terms of, if they're thinking about launching into a new territory, you know, is e-commerce the best medium? Actually, do they need to have a physical presence on the ground? How they might be able to best get that information?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on your industry, and it really depends on what you actually do, because the business models are so different that I wouldn't give like one advice to everyone here. But again, start with, I think maybe in the second or in the third series of these webinars, you were already talking about understanding your audience. So you can, you really need to start with understanding your audience and asking your audience. So I like the word that Nick used, guesstimate. So don't guesstimate. Yeah, just go and ask people directly. Again, in Russia, that could be quite challenging if you speak to Russia, because as I said, only 5% speak English. And if you ask people, again, in Russia, consumer demand is concentrated in 15 biggest cities with 1 million plus population. So of course, this market is the most has the most potential to everyone. So you can start from asking people there, and many of them speak English, so they can answer you. But again, you really need to have someone on the ground who can really guide you there. And again, I know I have another friend and colleague of mine who lives, she's Russian, but she lives in Argentina. Actually, I think I know more Russians there that are living elsewhere, but not in Russia. And anyway, she was, she had a case of a startup in Argentina that started, like, you know, the Amazon business model with this e-commerce and goods delivery, etc. And when he started, people were saying, people were just telling that he's absolutely stupid, because a Latin American would never buy things that he couldn't touch and he couldn't see and he couldn't smell. But now I don't know if he has already become a unicorn or he's close to be there. But actually, I mean, no one really expected, and his business has just rocketed. So again, that's also a kind of, there is a big component also of being lucky, I think, but also you cannot be lucky before you do that proper homework, research, analysis, talk to your audience, all that stuff.
I think that's very, very, very valuable, actually, understanding your customer and knowing that feedback. There was a quick question I'd had, which was, I think, actually coming back perhaps a little bit more closer to home for us, one for you, Nick. So you'd obviously talked very much at the beginning about different locations, key areas in Europe, different regulations, accountancy, procedures. So actually, again, understanding those markets. I mean, are you seeing trends or different locations in Europe where people, you know, which are creating those little hubs for people to use as a platform to perhaps do business more broadly across Europe, whether that is Germany, Switzerland, France, Italy?
I think probably the biggest trend at the moment here certainly in Germany, probably Switzerland is probably close behind it, is the switch from the cash is king culture to e-commerce.
Yeah.
And there are growing almost like hubs now. Berlin is I think the startup capital of Europe at the moment. Hamburg is where if you want to have somebody look at apps and things, and there's an internet sort of hub there. The tech businesses are in Munich, but the thing that I've noticed here over the last, since March, is contactless payments. People don't trust contactless here in Germany.
Okay.
Absolute cash is king. If you pull a credit card out to pay for dinner, people will look at you and ask why you have one of those.
Wow.
And that has really, I mean, because of Corona, and obviously you go to the supermarket and you cannot give cash to the cashier or whatever, it's all on a card. Whereas if you go to Sweden, they are a cashless society, more or less. So there's little nuances there. At a couple of years ago, film team working wherever it was in Sweden, and they tried to pay for dinner with cash. And the guy in the restaurant went, well, we don't take cash at all. And it's like, well, how do you? So there's little nuances there, but certainly Corona I mean, the e-commerce has brought to the fore, you know, the Corona, you know, more people are shopping with Amazon and all the rest of it. But one of the things that as a consequence of that is Deutsche Post, the mail service here, is collapsing under the weight of Amazon deliveries. They can't cope. So they're traditionally used to, I mean, Germany is famous. It is sort of like the paperwork and procedure capital of the world. But now, because it's going contactless, it's going paperless and all of that, Germany is an older country, and it's very much set in its ways. And there's very much a culture shift now as to how they do business, how it shifts and all the rest of it. And it's really quite strange to see. And they've actually had leaflets come through the door doing education processes, just how to use a contactless bank card for elderly citizens, stuff like that. It's not uncommon for a German person to be walking around with about 4,000 euros in their pocket. They are quite seriously cash rules. If you can't produce your cash there and then, and it comes down to the cultural trust thing and all of that sort of thing. Buying a car, they won't take a bank transfer or, you know, you produce a card and say, oh, we're doing it. No, it's got to be the money. There's little differences like that everybody's got to kind of take into consideration. And it's interesting with what Oksana has said as well, you know, Argentina will be different from Germany, which will be different from America, which will be, you know, a simple thing like sat-nav technology. Italians will use it for everything. And I mean, just go find a restaurant, I want a coffee. Paris is the center of that, and people will just use it to get around traffic jams. In England, people tend to use it just for long journeys. In Italy, if you buy a car and it's got a sat-nav, 9 times out of 10, it won't be used. Why? Because Italians do not like being told, German people do not like being told what to do, especially by a car. And it's really odd that you've got Mercedes and Audi, that the technology leaders, with all that. But they tend not to use their sat-nav. What will be in the back seat of the car? If you've got many German motorists, there will be a road atlas from 1978 that they've carried around with them ever since, and they'll use that.
So interesting. Obviously, it comes back down to knowing your customer again.
Yeah, know the customer, know the culture.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, it's a very good place probably to end. We've gone over the hour, but lots of great insights there. And I think it is absolutely, cultures sort of come out as the absolute king of what we need to do. Do your research and find your local experts. So thank you so much, Nick, Oksana, Madeleine, for joining this afternoon. I hope everyone found this really useful. It will be typed up and distributed, as well as actually the live content. And we will be putting together our 7-part marketing series and sharing that over the next coming weeks. So hopefully that's really helped businesses really think about their business strategy, think about their marketing strategy. And I hope we can help those companies and individuals who are now thinking, end of year is coming, what can we do next? I've really enjoyed this series, and thank you so much indeed for joining. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much as well.
That was a pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks very much for the opportunity, guys, and for joining us this afternoon, and to Alice and Madeleine as well. Thanks, guys.
Lovely. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Madeleine. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone who was there with us.